The Christmas table glowed with silverware and crystal, yet I sat in a jacket that carried the smell of bleach from my night shifts. My son spoke of generosity, telling the room that I lived comfortably on his $9,000 allowance, as though my life were a medal pinned to his chest. Comfort. I ate stale bread, drank weak coffee, and worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. And when the truth hung in the silence, I saw my daughter-in-law's smile slipping, like an ornament falling off the tree. Before we move forward, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. The room felt suddenly airless, 30 sets of eyes turning between Michael's shocked expression and my weathered face, still marked with grease from the emergency plumbing job I'd rushed from to make it to this Christmas Eve gathering. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with roasted duck couldn't mask the arthritis cream I'd rubbed on my hands during the drive over, and I noticed several guests stepping back as if poverty might be contagious. Michael's face flushed red, then white, then red again as he stammered something about bank errors and miscommunications. Victoria whispered urgently into one of her phones while typing on the other, her diamond bracelet catching the light with every frantic movement. The business partners, two men in identical Navy suits who'd been laughing at Michael's generosity moments before, now studied their shoes with intense fascination. I recognized one from the financial magazines Michael used to leave at my apartment, back when he still visited. Back when $9,000 was supposedly keeping me comfortable. "There must be some mistake," Michael said, setting down his champagne with a trembling hand. "Victoria handles all the family finances. She assured me everything was set up through automatic transfer." His wife looked up from her phones, her expression shifting to concern so quickly I might have believed it if I hadn't caught that flash of panic first. She moved toward Michael, placing a manicured hand on his arm, playing the supportive wife to perfection, while her other hand kept typing on her second phone. The room began to buzz with whispered conversations, and I heard fragments that made my chest tighten. 2 years? Someone murmured. 9,000 monthly? Another voice calculated. That's over $200,000. The math hung in the air like an accusation, and I watched my son's world begin to crack at the edges. He kept looking between Victoria and me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, searching for words that wouldn't come. Sarah appeared at my elbow then. My daughter, who'd driven up from the city despite the snow warnings, carrying her old laptop bag that she'd had since college. She didn't say anything, just stood beside me with that quiet strength she'd inherited from her late mother. Her presence gave me courage to stay standing when my knees wanted to buckle from the 12-hour shift I'd just finished. The crowd parted slightly, creating a path between us and the door, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. "Dad, didn't you say you were meeting your old friend from the bank tomorrow?" Sarah asked quietly, loud enough for Victoria to hear. "The one who helped set up your accounts years ago?" I nodded, watching Victoria's face pale slightly at the mention of banking. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Victoria suggested, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes cold as the December wind outside. She was already moving toward Michael's study, expecting us to follow, to sweep this embarrassment under one of her expensive Persian rugs. But Sarah's hand on my arm kept me rooted in place. My daughter had something in her expression I'd seen before, the night she'd caught her high school boyfriend cheating. That calm before she presented evidence that destroyed his reputation. Michael's business partners excused themselves, mumbling about early flights and family obligations, though it was only 8 in the evening. Other guests followed suit, the party dissolving like sugar in rain. Within minutes, the grand room that had been filled with laughter and false cheer stood nearly empty, just family and the lingering scent of scandal. Victoria's phones buzzed incessantly, and she kept glancing at them with increasing agitation, occasionally typing rapid responses. "Dad," Michael finally said, his voice smaller than I'd heard it since he was 10 and had broken my father's watch. I swear I've been sending that money. Every month, $9,000, just like we agreed when Mom died." The mention of his mother made something twist in my chest. She would have seen through Victoria's act in a heartbeat, would have protected both her children from this kind of betrayal. Sarah shifted her laptop bag to her other shoulder, the weight of it seeming significant. "We should sit down," she said quietly. But her eyes were locked on Victoria. "All of us. There are some things we need to discuss about those transfers." Victoria's hand stilled on her phone, and for the first time since I'd made my announcement, she looked genuinely afraid. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8:30, and its sound seemed to break whatever spell had held us frozen. Victoria grabbed both phones and her designer clutch, muttering something about checking with the bank. But Sarah stepped smoothly into her path. "The banks are closed," my daughter said evenly. "But don't worry, I have all the records right here. I've been tracking our family finances for 6 months now." Victoria's face went pale under her carefully applied makeup. And that's when I knew for certain that those $9,000 had been going somewhere, just not to me. Sarah opened her laptop bag and pulled out a folder thick with papers, spreadsheets she'd been preparing for weeks, waiting for the right moment to reveal what she'd discovered. "Dad, I've been tracking something," Sarah said, her voice steady as she opened the folder. "The $9,000. It's been going somewhere else entirely." The morning after Christmas arrived, gray and bitter, matching the ache in my joints as I sat across from Sarah at the old diner on Route 7, the one where I'd taught both my kids to tie their shoes in the worn vinyl booths. She had her laptop open between the coffee cups and untouched plates of eggs, the screen reflecting off her reading glasses as she showed me spreadsheet after spreadsheet of numbers that made my head spin. 2 years of my son's supposed generosity, laid out in cold columns and rows, and not a penny reaching the account where I'd been waiting for it. "I started noticing things about 6 months ago," Sarah explained, her finger tracing the patterns on the screen. "When you mentioned working that second job at the warehouse, it didn't add up with what Michael kept telling everyone about taking care of you." She pulled up another document, this one showing Michael's bank statements that she'd gotten access to through her position as the family's unofficial accountant. The transfers were there, regular as clockwork, $9,000 on the first of every month. But the receiving account wasn't mine. "I texted my old friend from the bank last night," I said, checking my phone. "He agreed to meet us in an hour, said he'd explain what he could about tracing transfers without violating any rules." Sarah nodded approvingly. We'd need all the help we could get to untangle Victoria's web. My coffee had gone cold, but I clutched the mug anyway, needing something solid to hold on to as the reality sank in. Those months of choosing between medication and groceries, of patching my work boots with duct tape because new ones cost too much, of telling Sarah I was fine when she offered to help with rent, all while my son thought he was keeping me comfortable. The bitter irony tasted worse than the burnt coffee, and my hands trembled slightly as I set the mug down. "The account receiving the money is under Victoria's name," Sarah continued, minimizing one window to show another. "But here's where it gets interesting. She opened it 2 years ago, right after Mom's funeral, when Michael was overwhelmed with grief and signed whatever she put in front of him." My daughter's voice stayed clinical, professional, but I could see the anger in the tight set of her jaw, the same expression her mother used to get when someone tried to cheat us at the farmer's market. "There's more," Sarah said, pulling up a PDF of bank records from Chase. "Victoria's been making large transfers from that account to another one. The pattern is consistent, always within days of receiving Michael's money. The receiving account is registered to a company, but I can't tell what kind of business it is yet." The diner seemed to tilt slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the table. A company? This wasn't just mismanagement or carelessness. This was systematic, planned, deliberate. The waitress came by to refill our coffee, and I noticed her concerned look at my pale face. Sarah waved her away gently, then reached across the table to take my hand. Sarah's phone buzzed with an email notification. "That's from someone at Michael's company," she said, reading quickly. "Remember I reached out to his secretary after the party last night? She says she's been worried about Michael for months, noticed him signing papers without reading them. She wants to meet, says she has something we need to see." "Should I tell him?" Sarah asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard to reply to Michael's angry texts about last night. I shook my head slowly. Not yet. We needed more proof, something irrefutable that even Michael's blind love couldn't dismiss. Victoria was clever. She'd have explanations ready, tears prepared, whatever it took to keep her hooks in my son. My friend from the bank arrived right on time, sitting down with the careful movements of someone who'd heard too many stories like ours in his 30 years of banking. As Sarah explained the situation, I watched his expression shift from polite interest to professional concern. He pulled out his phone, made a quick call to someone at the bank, speaking in low tones about account verification and transfer traces. When he hung up, his face was grim. "I can't give you official information without proper authorization," he said carefully. "But I can tell you that large, regular transfers like that would have left a clear trail. If you haven't received them, someone redirected them deliberately." "Can you check one more thing?" Sarah asked, pulling up another document on her laptop. "This account number, can you tell us if it's a joint account or individual?" He studied the number, made another call, and nodded slowly. "Individual account. Opened 2 years ago. The timing is interesting." He couldn't say more without violating banking regulations, but his expression said everything. My hands weren't trembling anymore. They were steady, the way they used to be when I was young and strong and protecting my family from anything that might hurt them. Victoria had stolen from me, but worse, she'd stolen my son's trust, his love, his belief that he was a good son taking care of his aging father. That betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss could ever cut. Sarah pulled up the email from Michael's secretary again, this time showing me the attachments. She sent these last night after I contacted her. Security logs showing Victoria visiting the office when Michael was away, always with someone else. A tall man, well-dressed. She says they were looking at something on the computers, but she doesn't know what. The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the worn linoleum floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent diner. $9,000 a month for 2 years, funding Victoria's secret life while I worked double shifts and pretended everything was fine. The waitress rushed over with a towel, but I barely noticed her cleaning up the mess. "Dad," Sarah said, reaching across the table to grab my hand again. Her fingers were warm and strong, so much like her mother's. "We're going to fix this. We're going to get proof that even Michael can't ignore." She turned her laptop screen toward me, showing a plan she'd outlined. "First, we will meet with the secretary tomorrow. Then we confront Victoria with what we know. We control this, not her." My apartment looked even smaller when Michael and Victoria arrived unannounced 2 days after Christmas. Victoria wore cashmere that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and she kept touching it nervously while Michael paced between my second-hand couch and the garage sale television. Sarah was already there with her laptop and a folder of printed emails and photos the secretary had sent us. "Dad, we need to clear this up," Michael began, running his hand through hair that was starting to show gray at the temples. "Victoria explained everything. There was a mix-up with the account numbers at the bank. She's been sending the money to what she thought was your account." His voice carried that desperate tone of someone wanting to believe a lie. Victoria stood beside him, her hand on his arm in a gesture that looked supportive, but felt like control. She'd switched from 2 phones to just 1 today, though I could see the outline of another in her coat pocket. "I'm mortified about this whole situation," she said, her voice pitched perfectly between embarrassment and sincerity. "I should have double-checked the account numbers." Sarah opened her laptop slowly, deliberately. "That's interesting," she said, pulling up the security footage the secretary had sent. "Because according to these timestamps, you've been visiting Michael's office regularly when he's out of town, always with the same man." She turned the screen toward everyone, showing Victoria entering the building with a tall, well-dressed man, his hand on her lower back. Victoria's face was drained of color. "That's just a business associate," she said quickly. "We've been working on some investments for the family." But her voice wavered, and Michael was staring at the screen with growing confusion. "A business associate named James Morrison," Sarah said, pulling out printed bank records from her folder. "The same James Morrison who owns the company account you've been transferring the $9,000 to every month." She laid out the papers on my wobbly coffee table like playing cards, each one showing another piece of the puzzle. Michael looked between his wife and the documents, confusion giving way to something darker. "Who is James Morrison?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. Sarah pulled out another document, this one from public records. "James Morrison, divorced from Victoria Cole at 2018. Remarried to Victoria Cole would make you her second husband, Michael." The words hung in the air like smoke, and I saw Michael's world crumbling in his eyes. "You were married before?" Michael asked, his voice hollow. "To the man you've been giving my father's money to?" Victoria's silence was enough. She reached for her phone in her coat pocket, but Michael grabbed her wrist. "No," he said. "No more secrets. You're going to explain everything right now." Sarah had been recording everything on her laptop since they walked in. "Financial fraud over $50,000 is serious, Victoria," she said calmly. "Everything you say here matters." Victoria's mask finally cracked completely. "Michael, I can explain," she started, but her voice was desperate now, no longer smooth. "James and we have history. When we reconnected after your mother's funeral, things just happened. The money was supposed to be temporary, just until we figured things out." "Figured what out?" Michael asked, his voice rising. "How to steal from my father while keeping me drugged and compliant." He pulled a prescription bottle from his pocket, shaking it. "These pills you've been giving me, Victoria, they're 3 times the normal dose. I looked them up." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo of me leaving my apartment that morning with the message, "Stop now or things get worse." I showed it to the others, and Sarah immediately took screenshots. "They're threatening Dad now," Sarah said, her voice cold with anger. "That's witness intimidation." She looked at Victoria. "Is James behind this? Is he watching us?" Victoria was trembling now, her perfect composure completely shattered. "You don't understand," she said. "James and we've done this before. In other cities, with other men. It's what we do." But with Michael, I actually started to care. That's why it got so messy. The admission hung in the air, and Michael sank onto my couch like someone had cut his strings. "You're a professional con artist," he said flatly. "And I was just another mark." "The $9,000, I said, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. 2 years of it. While I worked myself sick, you were funding your life with your ex-husband using money meant for me." Victoria stood up abruptly. "I'm leaving," she said, but Sarah blocked her path to the door. "Not until we call this in," my daughter said firmly. "Sit down and wait." The sports bar on Chapel Street was packed for Thursday night football, the Giants playing the Eagles, and the noise level was exactly what I needed for this confrontation. Flat screens covered every wall, drunk college kids cheered at every play, and the smell of buffalo wings and cheap beer created the perfect chaotic atmosphere. I'd chosen this place specifically because Victoria hated everything about it. The sticky floors, the neon beer signs, the crowds of what she called common people. She'd be off balance here, out of her element, unable to control the narrative like she did in her pristine world. They walked in 20 minutes late, Victoria clinging to Michael's arm, James trailing behind with obvious confidence. The man from the security footage was even more arrogant in person. Michael steered them to our table, his face exhausted but determined. He'd stopped taking Victoria's pills 3 days ago, and though his hands still trembled occasionally, his mind was sharp. "Victoria has something she wants to say," Michael said, pulling out her chair. Victoria sat carefully, her designer dress absurd among the beer and wings crowd. James took a seat behind her, playing protective guardian. "I want to apologize," Victoria began, loud enough to be heard over the game. "We were investing the money for your future. We have documentation." She pulled out a folder that looked official from a distance. She pulled out a folder from her purse, thick with papers that looked official enough from a distance. The way she held it, like a shield between us, told me everything I needed to know about what was really in there. Probably forged documents, creative accounting, anything to muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt. Sarah didn't even glance at the folder. Instead, she pulled out her phone and set it on the table. Screen up where everyone could see it. "Interesting timing for an apology," she said, her voice carrying that same steady confidence she'd had since she was a kid standing up to playground bullies. "Especially since we've already shared everything with the proper authorities. They're very interested in patterns of financial fraud over $50,000. "This is ridiculous," James interjected, leaning forward. "We're trying to make this right. We'll pay everything back." He pulled out his leather checkbook, starting to write dramatically. But Victoria kept checking her phone nervously, eyes darting between the entrance and our table. The bar erupted in cheers as someone scored, and in the noise I saw her text someone quickly. $9,000 a month, I said, cutting through James's performance with the checkbook, my voice steady and clear despite the noise around us. "That's what my son thought he was sending me. That's what you two stole while I was working night shifts at my age, while my arthritis got so bad I could barely hold a wrench some mornings, while I ate canned soup for dinner because fresh food was a luxury I couldn't afford." My voice was calm, conversational even, but several people at nearby tables had started to notice our conversation, the tension at our table contrasting sharply with the celebratory atmosphere everywhere else. A woman at the next table actually turned off her phone to listen better, and I saw her nudge her husband to pay attention. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I won't sit here and be harassed," she announced, loud enough that more heads turned our way. "You're trying to extort us, making up lies about theft when everything was perfectly legal. We have lawyers. We have documentation." She was playing to the audience now, trying to flip the script, make us look like the aggressors, the unreasonable ones. That's when Sarah played her ace. She opened her laptop with deliberate slowness, connected it to her phone's hotspot, and pulled up the file she'd been saving for this moment. "Legal, you say? Then explain this." She turned the screen toward Michael, but positioned it so Victoria and James could see it too. The security footage from Michael's office building played silently but clearly, date-stamped from a week ago, showing Victoria and James entering together when Michael was supposedly in Boston, his hand on her lower back in a gesture that was definitely not professional. "So what?" James said, but his confidence was cracking like ice in warm water. "We had a business meeting. That proves nothing except that we met to discuss investments." But his voice had gone up half an octave, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the bar's aggressive air conditioning. Sarah clicked to another file, and suddenly Victoria's voice filled our little corner of the bar, recorded crystal clear through the speaker. "Michael's pathetic. He actually believes I love him. Meanwhile, his father is practically homeless, working himself to death. $9,000 a month and the old man sees nothing. Sometimes I feel bad, but then I remember how much money Michael has. He won't even miss it." The construction workers at the next table had given up all pretense of not listening. One of them, a guy about my age with hands as rough as mine, shook his head in disgust. "That's cold, lady," he said loudly. "Stealing from an old man trying to make an honest living." The bar's security guard had noticed the tension at our table and was moving closer, not intervening yet, but definitely watching. Michael's face had gone pale as paper, and he was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. The tremors in his hands completely stopped by pure rage. "You recorded her?" he asked Sarah, his voice barely audible over the game. "Not me," Sarah said, pulling up another document on her laptop. "Your secretary did. She's been worried about you for months, noticed you were signing things without reading them, saw Victoria accessing files she shouldn't have been able to see. She came to me last month with her concerns and her recordings. She cares about you, Michael, unlike some people at this table. How much? Michael asked Victoria directly, his voice steady now, businesslike, the voice he used when negotiating million-dollar deals. Forget the excuses, forget the lies. How much did you take in total? Victoria started to answer, probably with another lie, but James cut her off, apparently deciding that partial honesty might help their case. $216,000 from the monthly transfers, he said, setting down his pen, plus about $50,000 from other accounts. But we were going to pay it back, every penny. This was just temporary, a loan, really. The number hung in the air like a physical presence, and I saw several people at nearby tables pull out their phones, probably recording what was turning into quite a scene. The bartender had turned down the music slightly, and even some of the servers had stopped to watch. Victoria saw all the phones, too, and panic flashed across her perfectly made-up face. "We need to leave," she said urgently to James, already grabbing her purse. "Now, this is getting out of hand." She stood up. But the path to the door was crowded with people watching the game, and now some of them were watching us instead. But Michael wasn't done. He stood up too, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I saw the successful businessman he'd become, the one who'd built an empire from nothing, the one his mother would have been proud of. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice carrying the authority that made board rooms full of executives listen. "You're going to sit down, and we're going to wait here together while I make some calls, or I'll make sure every business contact you have, every social connection, every single person in your pathetic lives knows exactly what you did to my father." James laughed, but it was harsh and bitter, nothing like his earlier confidence. "You think you can threaten us? Your father's just a plumber, and you're having a breakdown in a sports bar. Who's going to believe you over us?" He stood up too, moving closer to Victoria in a protective gesture that made my skin crawl. That's when the bar's manager appeared, a young guy with a Red Sox tattoo on his forearm who looked like he dealt with drama every night, but hadn't seen anything quite like this. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking between our tense faces and the growing crowd of onlookers. Before anyone could answer, Sarah spoke up clearly. "Yes, actually. These two," she pointed at Victoria and James, "have just admitted to stealing over $200,000 from my family. We'd like you to call the police, please." The manager appeared, drawn by the disturbance. Sarah spoke up. "These two admitted to stealing over $200,000 from my family. We'd like you to call the police." The manager's eyes widened. He pulled out his phone, and suddenly half the bar was watching. Victoria tried to leave, but security guards blocked the exits. "Ma'am, please wait until this is sorted," the manager said. "This is kidnapping," James shouted, but his hands shook as he pulled out his phone. Victoria had gone silent, pale under the bar's harsh lights. Michael sat heavily. 2 years of lies. Did you ever care about me at all? Victoria looked at him, and for a moment, something like regret crossed her face. I did care, at first. But then James came back, and he reminded me who I really was. "Trophy wife?" I said, my voice carrying. "My son gave you everything. $9,000 a month meant for me." The woman who'd been listening at the next table actually applauded. "Tell her, honey," she called out. "My ex tried the same sob story. These people, they take and then play victim when they get caught." As we waited for the police, Victoria made one last attempt. "Michael, we can work this out privately. Think of your reputation." Michael looked at me, then Sarah, then back at Victoria. "My reputation? I've been telling everyone how well I care for my father while he worked double shifts. At least now they'll know why." 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. The manager explained the situation and the amount involved. Victoria and James were asked to step outside with them. "This isn't over," James said weakly as they were led away. Michael slumped in his chair. "Dad, I'm so sorry. $9,000 a month. How did I not see it?" She drugged you, I said quietly. Kept you confused, so you wouldn't ask questions. Sarah closed her laptop decisively. We'll get through this together. And Michael? They had plane tickets to Miami for tomorrow, one way. They were planning to run. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and disappointment, a combination that seemed fitting for what we were about to uncover. Sarah's friend from law school had agreed to meet us on Saturday morning, despite the holiday weekend, and she'd already been working on our case for 2 days straight. Michael sat across from her massive oak desk, finally clear-headed after stopping the medications Victoria had been feeding him, though his hands still showed occasional tremors from withdrawal. She spread out the documents Sarah had collected like she was dealing cards for the world's most depressing poker game. The evidence is clear and damning, she began, adjusting her reading glasses. Victoria got power of attorney over family finances 2 years ago when Michael was grieving. She was smart about it, but she got greedy. The excessive transfers, the prescription fraud, the property purchases, it all shows a pattern of deliberate, calculated deception. How did I not see it? Michael asked, his voice raw from sleepless nights. He'd been calling me every few hours since Thursday's confrontation, apologizing repeatedly, promising to make things right, sounding more broken with each conversation. The fog Victoria had kept him under was finally lifting. But what it revealed underneath was devastating. Sarah pulled up the audio files on her phone that the secretary had sent us days ago. Because she made absolutely sure you couldn't see it, she said, hitting play. Listen to this. The secretary recorded it 3 weeks ago when Victoria thought she was alone in your office. Victoria's recorded voice filled the room, crystal clear despite being recorded through a hidden phone. Michael's so pathetic it's almost sad. He actually believes I love him. He thinks he's this great son, sending $9,000 a month to Daddy, while his father is practically homeless, working himself to death at his age. $9,000 a month, and the old man sees nothing. It's almost too easy. Sometimes I feel bad, but then I remember how much money he has. He won't even miss it. The coffee cup in Michael's hand shattered against the floor, ceramic pieces scattering across the expensive carpet. His whole body was shaking now, not from the medication withdrawal, but from pure rage. She knew, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She knew Dad was suffering, and she laughed about it. She thought it was funny. The lawyer handed him tissues for his bleeding hand, cut from picking up the ceramic shards. This recording changes everything significantly, she said carefully. This shows clear intent to defraud, knowledge of harm being caused, and complete lack of remorse. We're looking at serious criminal charges here. She pulled out her phone, started typing rapidly. I'm filing the necessary paperwork today. Their assets will be frozen by Monday morning. They won't be able to access any accounts. But Sarah wasn't done. She pulled up a video file on her phone, grainy footage from what looked like an expensive restaurant. This is from 3 weeks ago, she said. A friend of mine was at the same restaurant and recognized Victoria. She thought it was weird Victoria was there with another man, so she recorded a bit. The video showed Victoria and James at a corner table, both dressed like they were celebrating something special. The audio was muffled, but clear enough. To Michael's money, James was toasting, raising a glass of champagne that probably cost more than I made in a week. And to the old fool who made it all possible by being too proud to tell his son he wasn't getting the checks. 2 more years and we'll have enough to retire to the islands. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. A mixture of hurt and anger that made my arthritis seem like nothing in comparison. When exactly was this taken? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Sarah checked the metadata on the file. December 3rd, she said quietly. Dad, that's the same day you collapsed at work from exhaustion. While you were in the emergency room refusing to call us because you didn't want to worry anyone, they were toasting your suffering with champagne that cost $300 a bottle. There's more, Sarah said, pulling out a folder of printed medical records. I had a friend in healthcare look into something. Victoria's been getting prescriptions for anxiety medication from 4 different doctors, all in Michael's name. She tells each doctor a different story about his symptoms. She's been getting 4 times the normal dose, enough to keep someone in a permanent fog. She's been drugging him systematically for over a year, gradually increasing the doses so he wouldn't notice. The calculation of it, the long-term planning, the deliberate poisoning of my son while she robbed us both. It was breathtaking in its cruelty. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or desperation. This was a carefully orchestrated scheme by someone who'd done it before and would do it again. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood went cold. It was a photo of me leaving my apartment that morning, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. The message read, "Stop now, or things get worse for everyone. You have no idea who you're messing with. We have friends everywhere." I showed it to the others, and the lawyer immediately took photos of my phone screen with her own phone. "They're threatening you now?" she said, her voice sharp with anger. "That's witness intimidation on top of everything else. They're getting desperate, which means they're dangerous." As if on cue, Michael's phone rang. Victoria's name on the screen. He looked at us, then put it on speaker without being asked. "Baby," Victoria's voice came through. Different now, desperate and scared. "I know you're upset, but you have to understand it was never supposed to go this far. I do love you. James means nothing to me. It was just about the money at first. But then I really fell for you. We can work this out, please." "You drugged me," Michael said flatly, no emotion in his voice. "You kept me sedated and compliant while you stole from my father. You watched him suffer, and you laughed about it. That's not love, Victoria. That's sociopathic." There was a long silence on the other end before Victoria spoke again. And when she did, all pretense was gone. Her voice was cold, calculating. "You can't prove the drugs were intentional. Any good lawyer will argue you were self-medicating for stress. And if you try to use those recordings in court, I'll destroy you. I know things about your business, about your deals. Some of them weren't exactly legal, were they? Who do you think they'll believe?" The lawyer grabbed the phone from Michael's hand before he could respond. "This conversation is being recorded, Victoria. You've just added blackmail and extortion to your list of crimes. I suggest you get a very good attorney. You're going to need one." She hung up before Victoria could respond. "Let them run to Florida," Michael said suddenly, a strange smile crossing his face. "Let them think they've escaped. Because I just remembered something important. That property they bought? I had to co-sign for the loan. Victoria told me it was an investment property for our retirement. That means I'm part owner and I can freeze the asset. They'll arrive to find they can't access their own property." For the first time in days, I saw my son smile with genuine satisfaction. $9,000 a month they stole from my father, he said, already dialing his bank. $216,000 total. Now they're about to lose everything they bought with it, and then some. Sarah pulled up one more document on her laptop, her expression grim. "Dad, Michael, there's something else you need to know. Victoria's done this before. Different names, different cities, but the same pattern. Marry wealthy men, gain control of finances, steal systematically while keeping them medicated and confused. I've found at least 3 other victims so far, maybe more." The room fell silent as we absorbed this. Victoria wasn't just an opportunistic thief or a bad wife who'd gone astray. She was a professional con artist, a predator who specialized in destroying families, and my son had been her latest mark. "We need to warn the others," I said finally. "Those other men, they deserve to know what happened to them. They deserve justice, too." The lawyer was already taking notes, her expression shifting from professional concern to something more like excitement. "With multiple victims across state lines, this becomes a federal case. We're not just talking about fraud anymore. This is organized crime. She could be looking at decades in prison." The lawyer's phone rang. She listened intently, then hung up with a satisfied expression. "They've been located. Victoria and James were arrested trying to board a flight to Miami. They're being held without bail due to flight risk." She smiled grimly. "Your money is safe, and justice is coming." Michael stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. "Dad," he said without turning around, "I'm going to make this right. Every penny she stole, you'll get back, plus damages, plus interest, plus whatever it takes to make up for 2 years of suffering while I was too drugged to see what was happening. The money doesn't matter as much as having you back," I told him, and meant it. Having my son back, clear-headed and free from her manipulation, that's worth more than any amount. The Olive Garden on Whalley Avenue held 23 years of family memories. Michael's first date in high school, where he'd been so nervous he'd spilled marinara sauce on his shirt. Sarah's acceptance to college celebration, where we'd ordered one of everything on the dessert menu. The quiet dinner after my wife's funeral, where we'd sat in silence and just held hands across the table. Now it would host one more defining moment, one that would either destroy us completely or finally set us free. I'd chosen it specifically because Victoria had always sneered at chain restaurants, called them pedestrian and beneath her station, which meant she'd be off balance from the moment she walked through those familiar doors. The familiar smell of garlic breadsticks and marinara sauce gave me strength, as Sarah and I waited in our usual corner booth, the one we'd always requested for family occasions. Her laptop bag sat beside her like a faithful companion, containing everything we needed to end this nightmare once and for all. The Saturday evening crowd was perfect. Families everywhere enjoying their meals, about to become unwitting witnesses to something they'd never forget. They arrived 15 minutes late, Victoria dressed like she was attending a charity gala instead of a family dinner at Olive Garden, her black dress and pearls absurdly formal among the casual diners in jeans and sweaters. James walked beside her in a suit that probably cost more than most people here made in a month, his hand possessively on her lower back as they followed the hostess. Michael came in separately 2 minutes later, looking healthier than he had in years now that Victoria's poison was finally out of his system. His eyes were clear, focused, ready for what needed to be done. "Thank you for coming," Michael said as they sat down, his voice steady and controlled. The tremors were completely gone now, replaced by a focused intensity I hadn't seen since before his mother died. Victoria immediately reached for his hand across the table, her movements practiced and calculated, but he pulled away before she could make contact. "We're here to discuss restitution," he said simply. "Nothing more. No reconciliation, no forgiveness, just the money you stole." Victoria's perfect mask slipped slightly, a crack appearing in her composure. "Restitution? Michael, darling, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. We can work through this as a family. Marriages have rough patches." She glanced around the restaurant with barely concealed disdain, probably calculating how many witnesses were present, how public this confrontation might become. James sat silent beside her, watchful, his hand on her thigh under the table, in a gesture that made my stomach turn. Sarah opened her laptop without ceremony, the startup sound seeming especially loud in the moment. She turned the screen to face Victoria and James, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Let's review the facts," she said, her voice carrying just enough to make the nearby tables glance over with interest. 2 years of systematic theft, $216,000, all meticulously documented here. She clicked through spreadsheet after spreadsheet, each one showing the trail of money from Michael's account to Victoria's to James's. "Lower your voice," Victoria hissed, her composure cracking further. But Sarah continued at exactly the same volume. "Then there's the property in Florida, purchased with stolen funds 6 months ago. The prescription fraud, keeping Michael drugged and compliant for over a year. Your previous victims in California and Texas." With each revelation, more diners were openly staring, their meals forgotten as drama unfolded before them. "You're harassing us," James said loudly, playing to the growing audience. "We came here in good faith to discuss a family matter, And you're attacking us with baseless accusations." He started to stand, his chair scraping against the floor, but Michael stood too, and something in his posture, his presence, made James sink back down immediately. "You're going to sit there and listen," Michael said, not loudly but with an authority that made everyone in earshot pay attention. "Then you're going to sign these documents transferring the Florida property to my father as partial restitution for what you stole." He pulled out a folder from his jacket, thick with legal documents. "Or tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the tri-state area gets our story, complete with recordings, evidence, and photos." Victoria laughed, but it was bitter and sharp. Nothing like the tinkling laugh she used to charm Michael's business associates. "You wouldn't dare. The scandal would ruin you too. Your precious reputation, your business connections, everything you've built would come crashing down." But her hand was shaking as she reached for her water glass, and I noticed she kept glancing at her phone every few seconds. A teenager at the next table had given up any pretense of not watching and was openly recording on his phone. Victoria noticed and snapped at him, her mask slipping completely. "Turn that off immediately! This is a private conversation." The kid just smiled and kept recording. "This is going viral, lady," he said with teenage nonchalance. "Stealing from an old man while he's working double shifts. That's cold. My followers are going to love this." "Every penny," I said, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived, my voice cutting through the noise of the restaurant. "I want every penny of the $9,000 a month you stole while I was working double shifts at my age, while I was skipping heart medication because I couldn't afford it, while I was eating one meal a day to make ends meet." Victoria turned to me then, and for a moment her mask completely dropped, showing something ugly and calculating underneath. Something that had always been there but hidden behind designer clothes and practiced smiles. "You should have asked Michael directly about the money," she said coldly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Any reasonable person would have verified they were receiving such large transfers. This is partly your fault for being too proud to check." The cruelty of it, the victim blaming, caused audible gasps from nearby tables. A woman with her family 2 tables over actually stood up and said, "Are you seriously blaming him for trusting his son?" The crowd was turning, and Victoria realized it too late. Michael's face went from pale to red in seconds. "How dare you?" he said, his voice shaking with rage. "How dare you blame my father for your theft?" He turned to address the growing audience, standing up so everyone could see him. "Everyone, I want you to know who these people are. This is my wife Victoria, and her ex-husband James Morrison. Yes, you heard that right. Her ex-husband. They stole $200,000 that was meant for my elderly father while he worked himself into the hospital." "Sit down," James said urgently. But Michael wasn't finished. "They used that money to buy property together in Florida, to fund their rekindled romance while my father, who is 71 years old, worked security night shifts and plumbing emergencies because he was too proud to tell me he wasn't getting the money I sent him." The restaurant had gone completely silent except for the Italian music playing softly overhead. Even the kitchen staff had come out to see what was happening. James tried once more to salvage the situation. "We'll pay it back," he said desperately, his smooth confidence completely shattered. He pulled out his checkbook, that same leather-bound prop he'd used at the bar. "Right now. How much do you want? 300,000? 400? Name your price and let's end this." Sarah laughed, harsh and bitter. "You think you can buy your way out of this? After what you've done to our family?" She clicked to another file on her laptop, and suddenly Victoria's voice filled the restaurant through the speakers. "Michael's so pathetic it's almost sad. He actually believes I love him. $9,000 a month and the old man sees nothing. It's almost too easy." "Turn it off!" Victoria screamed, lunging across the table for the laptop. Her sudden movement knocked over glasses and sent water and soda cascading across the table and onto her designer dress. She stood there, dripping and humiliated, her carefully styled hair ruined, makeup running down her face, as the entire restaurant stared in shocked silence. The manager appeared then, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but here. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though the problem was obvious to everyone in the restaurant. Before anyone could answer, Michael pulled out his phone and showed the manager something on the screen. "These two people," he said, gesturing at Victoria and James, "are wanted for questioning in a fraud investigation. The police have already been notified and are on their way." It wasn't entirely true yet, but Victoria and James didn't know that, and the fear that flashed across their faces was beautiful to watch. They exchanged panicked looks, and both stood to leave, but the path to the door was blocked by other diners who had gotten up to get a better view of the drama. Someone started slow clapping, sarcastically, and soon others joined in, a mocking ovation for the exposed thieves. Victoria's face crumpled, tears finally breaking through her perfect makeup, though whether they were from shame, frustration, or fury was impossible to tell. "The prenup," Michael said suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Remember the prenup you signed, Victoria? The one that states any criminal activity voids all claims to marital assets? You get nothing. No alimony, no property, no share of anything I've built." Victoria froze completely. "That was just for show," she said weakly. "You said it would never be enforced." "Your lawyer confirmed it's ironclad," Michael said, showing her something on his phone. "And here's the best part. The Florida property you bought with my father's money? Since I co-signed under false pretenses, my lawyer says I can claim it as damages. You're about to lose everything." 15 minutes later, 2 police officers entered the restaurant, their presence causing another wave of whispers through the crowd. They approached our table with professional calm. "Victoria Cole and James Morrison?" one asked. Sarah handed them a folder she'd prepared. "Documentation of fraud exceeding $200,000, officer. Everything you need is in here." As they were being escorted out, Victoria turned back one last time, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Michael, please," she said. And for the first time, she looked genuinely broken. "I did love you, in my way." Michael stood up, walked over to her, and spoke quietly enough that only those of us at the table could hear. "Your way of loving cost my father 2 years of suffering. Your way of loving nearly destroyed my family. Your way of loving is poison, and I'm finally free of it." The officers led them away, past the still recording phones and the whispers that would follow them forever. The restaurant slowly returned to normal, though people kept glancing at our table and whispering. Michael slumped back into his seat, exhausted but somehow lighter, like a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. "It's over," he said, looking at me with eyes that were finally truly clear. "Dad, I'm so sorry. $9,000 a month for 2 years, and you suffered in silence to protect my feelings." "We did it together," Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze both our hands. "That's what family does. We protect each other, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." The manager reappeared with a bottle of wine and 3 glasses. "On the house," he said quietly, setting them on our cleaned table. "My grandmother went through something similar. Someone she trusted stole her life savings. It's good to see justice being served for once." "I'm transferring $18,000 to your account right now," Michael said, pulling out his phone with steady hands. "That's double what I thought I was sending you, just to start. We'll sit down and calculate everything you're owed, plus interest, plus damages for your suffering." The teenager who'd been recording stopped us as we were leaving. "That was epic," he said to Michael. "Your dad seems like a really cool guy. You're lucky to have him." Michael looked at me, his eyes filling with tears he didn't try to hide. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm incredibly lucky. It just took me way too long to remember that." 4 weeks later, sunrise through my new apartment windows. The settlement had cleared. Victoria took a plea deal, 5 years minimum, full restitution. James faced worse. Michael arrived at 7 with coffee and donuts from our old shop, looking healthier than in years. "It's really over," he said. We sat as morning light softened everything. "I'm starting the 9,000 Foundation," he said. "Help for elderly fraud victims. Sarah will run it. Having you back clear-headed matters more than money," I told him. That afternoon, Sarah brought photo albums. We looked through old pictures, remembering better times. "Mom would be proud," she said, pointing to Michael's graduation photo. Michael's phone buzzed, a text from Victoria in custody. He deleted it unread and blocked the number. "That door's closed." "Dad, would you consider moving closer?" he asked at the door. "Already looking," I admitted. After they left, I sat with my bank statement showing more money than I'd ever had. But the family dinners planned, the foundation we'd build, the rebuilt relationship, those mattered more. $9,000 a month. A promise that became betrayal. Then evidence. Finally justice. Soon it would help others through the foundation. Pain transformed to purpose. The crossword's last clue. Recovery after betrayal. 7 letters. I penciled in healing and smiled. Tomorrow, coffee with Michael, Sarah's foundation plans, and helping others. We'd won not just legally, but won each other back. Thank you for listening to this old man's story. If you've witnessed financial abuse in your family, speak up before it's too late. What would you have done in my position? Please share to the comment below. And remember, family bonds tested by fire come out stronger.